Hello, horror freaks. Horror Man Mike here. Earlier this year, my girlfriend asked me a very simple question, seemingly a very simple question. She asked me, what is a Giallo? What is a Giallo film? Like, how is a Giallo different than just a slasher film? What makes a Giallo special? And I gave her an answer. I said Giallos are kind of like murder mysteries, whereas slashers are just like body count, kill, 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 and that's it. And she seemed like really happy with that answer, and that was fine in the moment, but I've actually been thinking about it. I've been thinking about it for months. What is the difference between a Giallo film and a slasher film? What are the differences between these two? So after pondering this for so long, I feel like this subgenre, these two subgenres of horror are so very similar, and yet they're so distinctive that I feel like this question deserves a little more precision with answering. So I have thought about this question and thought about it and thought about it, and I have come up with a list of bullet points or talking points that I feel is a somewhat comprehensive list of what is a Giallo, what is a slasher, what is the difference between these two. I kind of view them as two sides of the same coin. And I've also turned these bullet points over to members of horror communities and discussion forums that I'm in to get feedback and say, okay, what do you think of these points? But also more importantly, what did I miss? So this video is the culmination of all of this banter and talk, and hopefully we will add some more precision and definition to the difference of what is a Giallo, what is a slasher. Before I go over these points, I want to preface this by saying two things. Number one is you are going to find films that make exceptions to all of these rules on both sides of the coin. On all of the points that I'm going to make, I'm going to use the terminology, I'm going to try to use the terminology typically or usually, because you will find, for everything I say in the Giallo category, you're going to find slasher movies that do that. For everything I say in the slasher category, you're going to find a Giallo that does that. There are exceptions to every, I don't even want to call them rules. There's going to be exceptions to every guideline. So there will be exceptions. And number two, let me say that I am not a film historian. I'm not a film expert. I don't have a degree in cinematography or film history. I don't have a degree in anything. I am a dude that watches a lot of movies, and I'm just trying to find the common denominator between these two subgenres. So that being said, let's dig into it. So first and foremost, I feel like one of the defining traits of a Giallo film is the fact that it is a murder mystery. The killer is unknown. It's somebody killing off cast characters, and then at the end it is revealed that the killer was this person the whole time. It ends up being identity revealed. And usually it is a character that's introduced in the first reel. Usually it's a character that's been in the film the whole time. That's why it's a murder mystery. You have a number of suspects, and just when you think you may have figured out, you know what, I think the killer is this person, then they get knocked off. So you're like, okay, that was a red herring. Who is the real killer? At which point the killer is revealed, the mystery is solved. Usually there's a damsel in distress that is saved or protected or something. And that is typically the format that a Giallo takes. Juxtaposing that, slashers, on the other hand, sometimes there is a hidden identity. Usually with masked slashers, it turns out to be, okay, who was doing the killing the whole time? But for a majority of slasher films, you know who the killer is. If not the characters, then the audience knows who the killer is. In the Halloween franchise, there's no mystery that the white masked killer stalking Haddonfield, Illinois was actually Michael Myers. Like, no shit. we established that Michael is a born killer in like the first 3 minutes of the first film. It's not a mystery. There's no big reveal that the Elm Street killer with the knives for hands is actually really Freddy Krueger. Like, yeah, no shit. We know that. We're waiting for the audience to know that, but we know that. And it's not really a big surprise or reveal that the guy in the hockey mask slaughtering people at Crystal Lake is actually, spoiler alert, Jason Voorhees. Okay, before we jump to the comments, I know Friday the 13th Part 1 was Pamela Voorhees, and I know 5 was Roy Burns. They did a red herring thing there, copycat killer. You can stay out of the comments section. I'm fully aware of that. But for Friday the 13th, 2, 3, 4, and from 6 onwards, the killer is Jason. We know it's Jason. The next point I want to make about the big difference between giallos and slashers is honestly the age range of the characters and the victims. Giallos are typically they're adults and they have adult lives and adult problems. These are people with houses, jobs, careers, marriages. They have agency, they have money, they have the ability to move about independently in their world. Whereas like a slasher movie typically has teenage characters, and they live teenage lives. They don't have really like money or job or agency. They're usually stuck in a household routine like with their parents or going to school. Whereas something in a giallo film, a premise for that is, oh, I got a letter from my sister that has me very concerned about her. I'm going to take a week off of work and fly to Rome to check on her. That's what a giallo person does. Whereas a slasher character is more like, hey, I got my dad's car this weekend and I got keys to a cabin out in the middle of the woods. Let's skip school and get drunk or something like that. It's just two different levels of interaction with the world. Adults typically have more money and agency and independence, and they can move about their world, whereas slasher characters are usually teenagers. They usually want to spend time away from parents, away from authority. They want to spend their spare time with their peers. Which leads me to my next point, which has to do with police and authority involvement. It is somewhat typical in a giallo film. When a person's life is in danger, they will call the police. They will seek protection. They will seek law enforcement because they believe, either correctly or incorrectly, they believe that reporting this and being under police protection will save them and the people close to them. Slasher characters, usually because they're teenagers, they want to spend their spare time away from authority. They want to go to isolated locations and just party and have fun with people their own age range. Slasher characters will usually seek to solve the problem of the killer within themselves, within their own community. They seek each other for help rather than, oh my God, let's get out of here, let's call the police or let's call authority. Sometimes in a slasher film, it's not uncommon for somebody to have the idea, let's call the police, and somebody shoots down that idea. No, we can't go to the cops because this reason. We can't go to the police for that reason. We can't talk to our parents because they won't believe us. Teenage characters will typically seek out other teenagers. Maybe they can't go to the police because in a slasher film, you're in an isolated location doing legally questionable things, drinking underage, using drugs, maybe you stole a car, maybe you're trespassing. In a slasher film, maybe teens are somewhere where they're not supposed to be. That's why they don't call authority. So I feel like giallo characters are much more likely to reach out to the police and law enforcement for help, whereas in a slasher film, the characters typically want to solve the problem themselves. So the next point I want to make kind of takes us out of the shoes of the characters and takes us into our world, the real world, to look at these films as films. I want to say that Giallo films typically have a very European feel, a very European sensibility with the use of color, camera angles, direction, plot writing and plot points, things like that. Specifically Italian. Giallo films can come from all over the globe, but they have a particularly Italian feel. If I had to recommend Italian Giallo films, first name I would recommend is Dario Argento. He's probably leader of the Giallo crusade, but I would also recommend certain films from Lucio Fulci, certain films from Mario Bava. These are films that are murder mysteries, but sometimes have sequences that are very dreamlike or fantasy-like, a little more fantastique, a little more perhaps metaphorical or symbolic. Whereas slashers, on the other hand, I feel like slashers are very American in their filmmaking. They're very hard, gritty, direct, brutally violent, and doesn't really leave a lot to the imagination, doesn't really leave a lot to the fantastique or the metaphorical. Which actually, ironically, I think that's why the Nightmare on Elm Street series is a favorite among so many people, is because in the Elm Street series, you can get dreamy. You can do things that break the rules of reality. Because breaking the rules of reality, at least in the Nightmare on Elm Street series, doesn't break the meta of that universe. Whereas typical other slashers are very hack, slash, cut, stab, you're dead. And there's very little metaphor or symbolism beyond that. It's brutal and realistic. And while we're on the subject of filmmaking and meta thinking, not within the film but in our world, I want to say that Giallo films typically don't really show their killers. You will see a silhouette of a person, or typically you'll see black gloved hands in frame. If a person's face or head is shown, it's usually shrouded in some kind of hat or a trench coat, or shrouded just in shadow. You might see the killer's shoes as they're walking away from a murder scene. Or very typically, you'll see their hands as they're holding a killing implement. But typically, usually in Giallo films, because of the hidden identity of the killer, you usually don't see the entire killer in frame. Slashers, on the other hand, we as the audience, we very much know who we're dealing with. The killer is front and center. You typically see whole body shots. You typically see their face, even if it's masked. Even if there's a slasher film that has a hidden identity of a killer, something like, I don't know, Valentine or Thanksgiving. The killer's identity is hidden in a mask, but still, you see the entire person in frame. Whereas Giallos, they're a little more shadowy, a little more hidden. The next point that I want to make about Giallos versus slashers is psychological motivation. In a Giallo film, I feel like the killers choose very specific victims for very particular reasons. It could be something psychologically motivating. It could be some kind of psychosexual desire. It could be a revenge plot. But I feel like Giallo killers are very, very particular about their victims. Slashers, on the other hand, again, the revenge slasher is a very common trope. However, a lot of slashers also tend to be very territorial. They don't really think about who they're killing. They're just killing anybody that comes into their turf or their territory. They don't really do research on their victims. They don't pick out victims for particular reasons. You're just wrong place, wrong time. You come across a maniac and you get killed. It's nothing personal. So while a Giallo is a little more calm, cool, calculated, and precise. A typical slasher is kind of more just like a rabid animal, just kind of lashing out at anybody that gets anywhere near them. Stemming off of that, there's a point that I've noticed in certain films about how killers treat their victims, particularly how they treat their victims' bodies. In a Giallo, depending on the person's motivation, they may show some kind of love or reverence for the person they've just killed. They may spend some time with the body. They may even move the body or perform some kind of ritual or pose them in some kind of way that's symbolically or psychologically important to them. They have a reverence for their victims. They stick around with the body. Again, not all the time, but it's not uncommon to see them stick around the body because this kill is important to them for some reason psychologically. Slashers, on the other hand, is more like stab, cut, you're dead. The body hits the ground, and I'm just going to move on to the next victim. Slashers will sometimes take bodies and move them or pose them, but it's more for like a shock value for fellow survivors to come across that body rather than any kind of psychological reverence they're having for their victims. Slashers are just kind of very brutal, direct, bang, you're dead, and I'm on to the next one. So that's the differences that I've noticed. I'm sure there are more. I'm sure I've missed something. But at least I hope this was a useful compilation of bullet points and talking points to kind of, I don't even want to say settle a debate because I'm not really here to debate anything. I'm not even here to settle anything, to kind of point out the commonalities between these two very similar subgenres of horror. I hope this video was useful. I hope it gave you some food for thought. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it. That's it for today. I'm Horror Man Mike, and I will see you in the next video.